Donc, bonjour, nous sommes sur la conférence sur le romantique suspense. Je suis très contente d'accueillir, nous avons en haut à gauche Toni Anderson, qui écrit et qui a plusieurs séries de romantique suspense. J. Kenner, c'est son nom d'auteur dans les traductions françaises, et Scarlett Cole, que certaines reconnaîtront, parce qu'elle était déjà venue sur la version française. Donc maintenant, je vais passer en anglais. So I just introduce all of you. Maybe we can begin and you can introduce yourselves each of you, and then I will talk about a few questions. So I don't know who wants to begin.
I'll begin.
Okay.
So I'm Julie Kenner. I primarily write as J. Kenner, especially for romantic suspense. I've been writing now for over 20 years professionally. It's my full-time job. I love it. And I've written in tons and tons of genres. If you guys have read me, I do a lot of romantic suspense. I currently have a series that is being translated almost contemporaneously into French, which is a spinoff of my best-selling series, which is the Stark series. So it's called Stark Security, and those are super fun to write. And I live in Texas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Scarlett.
Hey, I'm Scarlett Cole. I live in Manchester, but I also call Toronto home. I write romantic suspense and contemporary romance. Most of you are familiar with my Second Circle series, which was translated into French. And so I write, like I said, contemporary romance, and my romantic suspense books are two different types. I have Navy SEALs, so I have special ops heroes, and I also have what I call romantic suspense light, where the focus really is on the contemporary romance, but there is a subplot of suspense in the story, and that's what you get with Strong and Broken.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then Toni.
Hi, I'm Toni Anderson, and I am kind of the opposite of Scarlett, and in that I live in Canada at the moment, but I also call the UK home occasionally, and that's where I'm from. I write mainly, I guess my most popular books would be the cold justice books, which tend to focus on FBI agents or occasionally CIA agents or officers. And yeah, that's I've just started getting my books translated into French. So I have the first 3 done, and another 3 are being done this year. And so yeah, so the French translation stuff is all good to me. But I should say that living in Canada, I sent both of my children to French immersion school because my French language was so awful that I decided I would compensate by sending them to immersion school.
Thank you. Well then, how did you begin to write romantic suspense? I don't know, who wants to begin?
I'll go first.
Yes.
It was the first book I wrote. I had been a reader of romance for a really long time, and I knew I loved series romance where, you know, there is a hero and heroine in every story, but they're part of the same world. And so I've always really enjoyed the stories where you can't wait for book 2 and book 3 and book 4, whatever, to come out. And so that was sort of my starting point. I wanted to write series romance. And the books that I was reading at the time when I started writing always had a suspense element to it. And I always thought that that added something to the story when I started writing. And so that's really how I started doing it. It was just, that was what I was reading at the time. I knew I was going to leave my corporate job to start writing. That was the kind of the book I wanted to write. And it was years later that I went into more contemporary romance, but definitely when I started out, that was all I wanted to write.
Okay.
I'm pretty similar to that. I was a lawyer before I quit to write full time, and I always assumed that I would write a legal thriller because I was a lawyer and that's what I was reading. And I realized at the time that I was not all that thrilled with my job. And so what I wrote was not that thrilling, but there's that element of suspense in it that I really liked. And so even my first book, which was a Harlequin Temptation, just very much on the nose contemporary romance, had a tiny little suspense element in it. I love the value added of romantic suspense. And after a while, I've written a lot of books across a lot of different series, but after a while I started focusing more, making it actually romantic suspense. And there was something else I was going to say, but I've totally forgotten it. So there you go. Oh, and I also love series. I love getting involved in a series and getting sucked into a world, even if it's not the same character all the way across the board. I'm like Scarlett in that regard.
Okay.
I'm done.
So for me, when I moved to Canada for the first time in the 90s, I went into the local library and I suddenly discovered this whole new world, because in the UK, the romance sections in general are very limited, certainly back in the 90s. And I suddenly discovered like Nora Roberts and Karen Robards and Susan Brockman, and it blew my mind. And so that was it. As soon as and then I basically read everything in the entire library, and then decided that if I wanted to read anything else, I was going to have to start writing it. So that's what happened.
Okay. What transformation have you seen or heard of since you began to write romantic suspense?
I think for me personally in my writing, and I've seen it a little bit in my reading too, but specifically, I used to write more points of view. So there would be hero, heroine, bad guy, secondary characters. There was a lot of points of view in the books. They were very dense. And I don't tend to do that as much anymore. Mostly now, it's mostly just the hero and the heroine, maybe the bad guy, but usually not even that. So it's been a point of view kind of shift.
Okay.
I think for me, the thing I've seen change in the genre as a whole, if you go back 10 years, I think when you wrote romantic suspense, it was very much the hero saving the heroine. And I think a lot more contemporary romance focuses on partnership, teamwork, the two of them working together to solve something, rather than the sort of damsel in distress trope. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, because I love a great damsel in distress story. But I do think the genre, there's been a shift to, women playing an equal role in solving the suspense that's going on around them, which is a lot of fun to write. I wrote an FBI agent with one of my special ops guys, and it was so much fun to write a woman on the page who was just as capable and confident and smart as the guy who she was partnered with.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with Scarlett that that's the big change, that women no longer have to be saved. They can have an active role, and they don't have to have the too stupid to live moment where they do something stupid and suddenly the bad guy's got them. Although, you still have to have, for me, I still have to have that black moment. And sometimes that is when you force these two people apart and somebody gets in trouble, but it doesn't always have to be the heroine anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. Does your publisher or your readers ask you to write more or less romantic suspense book?
They ask me to write more, and I only write a couple of books a year, if that. So I always feel under pressure.
I read a lot of books in a lot of genres, and they all tend to have a suspense plot. So yeah, they always want the next book in the series. They're like, well, when is so-and-so story coming out? When is so-and-so story coming out? But honestly, the one I get the most is they want more Nikki and Damien Stark, and there's tiny suspense in that one. So it's not, it's mostly by that series. That's by far the one I get the most requests for.
Mine is a bit mixed. Obviously my French readers right now are trying to find out when they will get the last two books in the preload series. So my French publisher, Collection et Moi, stopped their romance line 2 books into the series. So I think for me, the questions that I get the most right now, when are we going to see those other 2 books in the series? So I'm still trying to figure that out. But so that's one piece. But then I do think for me, I get a lot more requests to just make sure I keep writing very angsty alpha heroes, and they don't really care whether there's a suspense plot or not, as long as they kind of fit the bill.
Okay. And so then, what is your daily routine as an author, and did it change with the pandemic?
It didn't really change with the pandemic. I pretty much sit at my desk and do busy work and tell myself I should be writing until it gets to the point where I have to be writing. And that, I mean, I've been working out of my house, so I will say that my life did not change a whole lot, except that I don't go out to bars and stuff and restaurants with my husband anymore, which is a nice chill factor, you know. So not really a whole lot of change, which is kind of pathetic when you think about it a certain way.
Mine changed in as much as I had to homeschool. There was a period of time when my kids were home, and I mean, they're good kids and they were quite focused, but it still takes a certain amount of, you know, checking up, and I would get interrupted by random questions about Edgar Allan Poe poems and things. My day is, you know, my husband gets up really early for work at 5:45, so I drag my laptop to bed at 5:45, and then I try to write 2,000 words before I get out of bed. So that's my sort of goal, because I figure if I start the day by being productive, I'll be productive for the rest of the day. If I don't do that 2,000 words, it'll be 10 o'clock before I sit down at my desk. But I will have watched every Henry Cavill video and caught up with Marriage at First Australia clips. So I have to do something productive first thing, because it sets up the day. And then I have a bunch of different goals. I also write narrative nonfiction under a different name. So my afternoon's usually dedicated to that. My morning's dedicated to romance. I have an hour at the end of the day when I try to do business stuff. And then Sunday morning, I load all my social media platforms for the week.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I manage my week.
Okay.
Wow. So yeah, and my world did change a little bit, in fact, a lot, because I just got into this lovely rhythm where I had the house to myself all day for the first time in years. And all of a sudden, everybody was home. So my husband was home, both kids back from, well, high school and university. And yeah, it was, and I live in, this is not my office. So my office is so open plan that you can literally see my husband behind. He went, if we were doing a Zoom right now, and he's a university lecturer, so who knows what's going on there. So it changed quite a lot in that I had to, you know, adapt to being, everybody else was adapting to being home, and I was adapting to everybody else being home. But I'm getting a little starting to get back to a routine where I'm, after the dog is walked, then some writing. You know, I sit down and write all day, but there are various distractions that come my way. I wish I could do 2,000 words before I got out of bed. It doesn't happen. So.
Okay, so let's have some questions about the characters of romantic suspense. I think some of you may, I don't know if you will like that question. Can you describe the usual suspects?
I'm gonna say no, because if you can describe the usual suspect, then the readers are going to know who it is right off the bat. So can't do it.
I tend to like them at the two extremes. I either like them completely in plain sight, like completely hiding in plain sight, or so covert you have no idea who this person is, that comes out of left field. I don't mind reading books where it's somewhere in the middle, but when I write them, it tends to be, we've no idea who this person is, or I see who this person is, but I have no idea how they're going to get away with what they think they're going to get away with, or how they're going to do what it looks like they're trying to do. I don't tend to write something in the middle.
Okay. What about you, Toni?
I don't think there's a usual suspect. I think it becomes too obvious. Then you're kind of writing the same book constantly over and over again.
And what about the perfect villain or perfect murderer?
I think that's what I just
the same. It's the same. Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Julie. I think that the perfect villain tends to be, well, for me, somebody you don't see coming.
Mhm.
But also as kind of on a level, either a little bit more intelligent or a little bit smarter than the hero and heroine, or on the same level. You can't have somebody who's kind of not as intelligent being the supervillain.
I totally ditto all of that. And then I would add that the one thing that will always bother me in a romantic suspense book that I read is if the villain, you don't necessarily have to have it thrown in your face through the whole book, but there needs to be really strong motivation for them to be the villain. They have a purpose. And sometimes there's just a villain who's like, sort of walks in and is like, hi, I'm the villain. And that doesn't work for me.
Okay. And does he have to die?
No,
I tend to kill a lot of mine, but I don't think they have to die.
no.
Even if it's what they've done is very awful. No.
They have to be brought to justice, but they don't necessarily have to die. I mean, for some of them, it would be worse to be alive and in prison. So, that could actually be a worse punishment for your bad guy.
What you
yes. Okay. About the main characters, are
Have an alarm going.
about the main characters, are they different from other romance genre, or are they stronger? Do they have special skills? Sorry.
Don't think they have to. I have two
Yeah.
series that one is, it's just regular people who are involved in something that becomes, criminal in nature, stalker or, some form of conspiracy, that they get caught up in a legal situation. And they're just everyday people. And then I have my Navy SEALs who are clearly just, trained to the nth degree to be able to, do what they have to do. And so I have both. One of the challenges I think you have when you write people like, Navy SEALs or special ops forces, you have to do your research about what they'd actually legally be allowed to get away with on American soil. Because if one thing takes me out of a romantic suspense book, it's when basic policy and procedure isn't followed, right? Like, they can't be involved in a shootout with the CIA because the CIA don't operate on American soil, the FBI do. CIA oversees intelligence. So if people get those things mixed up, where they believe they have special skills, but they're using them in a situation where they couldn't, like as a special forces person wouldn't just start firing a gun on somebody in the street in Houston, right? There's policy and procedure and protocols that are in place. So if they do have the special skills, they need to know how to use them within the law.
Okay.
Yeah. Agree. I mean, I agree with everything Scarlett said.
Okay. The next set of questions about writing romantic suspense. What kind of research do you do? Do you talk to specialists, or have you got consultants, for example, police department or FBI, or I don't know?
Yeah, I
So go ahead, Toni. Go ahead.
Sorry. So I have a really great contact in at FBI headquarters, but I mean, who's available to any writer. They have a great liaison, public liaison group, I guess, that are literally there for writers to contact and bombard with questions. So that's the main one. And my other sources of information tend to be biographies. Any biographies that written by an FBI agent is on my bookshelf and has been read or listened to umpteen times. So that's my main sources of info.
I always start with the internet because I don't want to talk to people. I'd rather just figure it out on my own. So I dig super deep into like these strange things. I oftentimes end up with like, they go down these rabbit holes, but ultimately I will actually talk to people. I've got a friend who's a former DEA agent, and he now teaches police, that I've pinged a couple of times, and a guy who does counterterrorism for the US, who travels all around, which was really interesting because I met him traveling for Paris last year. No, not last year. Last year doesn't exist in my mind. 2019. And
yes, it's last year.
last year. And we were at the same hotel, and we ended up chatting in the concierge lounge, and he's become a source for like this counterterrorism stuff, which is totally cool. And but then I've also just called whoever I need to call. I had a book one time where I wanted to know if a kidnapping had to be reported to the press, and so I'm on the phone with the FBI, like, I didn't kidnap somebody, but can you tell me, would this have to be reported in the press? And I did not have your liaison, Toni. So I'm like just randomly calling the FBI going, oh my God, are they going to come? Are the red lights going to start flashing in front of my house? I promise I'm not kidnapping anybody. So, but it's nice. You sort of gather your resources over the years for people you can call about certain specific things. And my heroes are always different. I don't have like a Navy SEAL book. I have these people who are recruited into Stark Security from all sorts of different backgrounds. So someone might be a former Navy SEAL. Someone might be, I've got one guy who's MI6 and stuff like that. So all sorts of different questions.
I like talking to them. So my husband finds it hilarious. I've got like people with, I call it, it's the Liam Neeson, that I have a very unique set of skills. Like the book has a very unique set of skills, and I'm very fortunate that sometimes conferences match locations. So I was really lucky when I was writing my Navy SEAL series that the Romance Writers of America conference was in San Diego. And so I had been talking to actually a retired, very senior retired member of the, I'm trying to be as vague as possible, but Navy SEAL organization, we'll just say that.
Okay.
And he arranged for me to meet with 3 active team members. And so I was able to meet them while we're in San Diego and actually go through certain scenes in my book.
Nice.
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear this. My computer suddenly started tapping because I've got an alarm that goes off at 6 o'clock. I apologize if that came across on the audio. Yeah, so we met with them and we went through my manuscript and sort of talked through all of the different scenes. And I have a very good friend who is a member of was a member of the Special Boat Service in the UK, which is the equivalent of the Navy SEAL organization. And he's great for those questions like, if I was trying to hijack a boat off the coast of such a place, and I needed to do it this way, like, how would it be done? And he will sometimes even call me and enact what would have to happen. Like for me, he'll, if he's just in his house, maybe he'll set up the salt and pepper shaker and he'll say, you have to do this. One time I asked about how if there was a farm and the hostage was inside it, how would they surround it and go in to get the hostages out? And he was about to go surfing and was wearing a pair of board shorts. And then he basically he locked himself out of his house, broke back into his house and showed me how he'd do it. And then said, you just need to make the farm the same layout as my house. And then he went around his house, like, I do this here and I do that there and I'd have somebody there and I do this. So like I like talking to them because you get
really cool.
Yes.
Live action replay.
It's precise, very precise.
Detail.
What's that? You cut out.
Yeah.
What do you imagine first, the love story or the plot? I don't know, the story inside the story.
I think it depends on the book. So sometimes, especially if you're plotting a series, you have a few story ideas and plots in mind, and as you go on, your different characters evolve as secondary characters, and then you start, they then get their own plot. So I think it very much depends. For me, it depends where I am in the series. And
okay,
yeah, definitely.
What about other mixed genre? You know, historical, romantic suspense, paranormal, romantic suspense. Is there a genre that cannot be combined with suspense?
I can't think of one that could not be combined. I mean, romantic comedy and suspense is obviously a different beast because it's, you know, for lack of a better word, sillier sometimes, but it can certainly be, you know, that would be, I can't think of one that you couldn't combine with romantic suspense.
But kind of, you could say Janet Ivanovic is kind of
Yeah,
that
for
mixed
sure.
comedy
Yeah.
suspense.
Absolutely.
I can't think of one.
No, but I'm now thinking about how you would mix romantic comedy and suspense. So I don't know how, but I'm sort of like, maybe if you think about it's an old TV show from the 80s, but if you think about Moonlighting.
Yes, I was just going to say Moonlighting.
Moonlighting, Broken, my second book in the Second Circle series, the hero and heroine are based on that. David and Maddie, quick banter,
right?
You know, conversation. But it is, that whole show was comedic, but it still had crime and suspense attached to it. It was just done in a really sort of funny way.
Yeah, it's just not that dark.
Book.
Yeah.
Yes, I see. Well, then, what advice do you want to give to others who would want to write their first romantic suspense?
That is a good question. I mean, the first thing, most authors, when somebody comes up to us and says, what advice do you have for me to write a book? We usually just say start, right? Like you just try and write. But there are books that help you figure out how to plot if that's your style. You know, some people prefer to sit down with a blank page and just start writing. I'm a plotter, so I prefer to have like at least a sense of where it's going, because I like to make sure the romance and the suspense sort of peak and trough and have quiet moments and dark moments at the same time. So, you know, books like Story Engineering by Larry Brooks is a really good book that helps think about how you structure a story. And I would also just say, read lots of it. If you want to write romantic suspense, read lots of romantic suspense, because it's amazing how much you learn just by reading the genre itself, because I think readers have expectations of what's in the genre too. So I think, you know, it's not written anywhere, but I think most people expect the bad guy to get caught. Right? It's not enough for them to just disappear. There has to be some end to that cycle, or, you know, the romance has to be closed and have a happily ever after, or happy for now if it's a series where the characters are ongoing in their own story. So I think there are reader expectations that you can understand and learn from reading lots of the genre. So I would just say, you know, read more.
I would add, not to get caught up in the weeds if this is your first time. It's so easy in some genres, historical and I think romantic suspense being the two primary ones, where especially for new authors, you'll be writing along and writing along and writing, and then suddenly you come to a dead stop because you don't know if he's going to have, you know, a handgun. Does this particular gun have a safety? And you can spend like a day going down that rabbit hole when it doesn't matter for your first draft. Just write the book, and then when you're editing, you can go back and find out if he has to deal with the safety, you know, or that's a silly example. But I get a lot of emails from new authors and aspiring authors who are like, I'm just stuck. It's like, well, just jump past what you're stuck on and keep going, because otherwise you can end up writing or rewriting the same first chapter for the rest of your life, and that doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned from just actually writing an entire book with, you know, beginning, middle and end. And I think that people don't actually understand. You know, a lot of people want to write books, or whatever book it happens to be, and a lot of people, like Julie says, they get stuck at a certain point and not realizing that actually sometimes it's the process of just finishing that first book, and then you can edit it, and then you can throw it away, whatever you want to do with your first book. But I think just having finished the process and completing a book is a huge accomplishment that that, you know, and teaches people or want to be writers a lot about themselves and about the process.
Okay, so we're right on time. So thank you very much. So this will be subtitled and on air on the festival.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.